Welcome to another edition of the Power Lunch Live on LinkedIn, LinkedIn's new live platform. I'm Rhett Power, your host. I do this program every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 12 noon or thereabouts. The point of the show, as I always say, is to talk to thought leaders, CEOs, corporate executives, best-selling authors, people who are doing special things and good work in the world, things that we can learn from, people that we can learn from. And today is no exception. I've got a phenomenal guest who's going to blow your mind. I know her new book did. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But the fun thing about the show is that it's interactive, and it's only interactive if you ask questions. So please throw your questions out to Katie and I today. If we don't get to them on the program, we can certainly engage with you on social media afterwards. And so don't be shy, ask your questions. If you like the program, give it a like or share so others can benefit from it as well. Now, this is all brought to you by Social Live. This platform allows us to simulcast on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and of course, LinkedIn. Now, my promise to you is always to bring you the best. And today, I think I've done myself proud. I've got Katie Patrick on the show. Katie is the founder of a creative tech company in San Francisco called Hello World Labs. She is an engineer and a game designer, and she's author of a couple of books. One that I really like that we're not going to probably get a chance to talk about today. Maybe we can come back to that one. And that one's Detrash Your Life in 90 Days. I love that. I love that idea. But we're here to really talk about our new book, which is How to Change the World. Katie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's actually How to Save the World. I've got a copy here. See the How to Save the World. What is it?
Can't even read my own writing. Where do social organizations or social good organizations kind of go wrong with what they're trying to accomplish? Is it? I know you talk about in the book you've got a sort of a 10-point strategy to help, but are there some things that you see in your work where we're just kind of missing it somehow?
Yeah, well, the overarching theme of making change is really understanding causality. And there really is a crisis of causality in social and environmental change, not with everybody, but with, I would say, 6 or 7 out of 10 social or environmental impact projects haven't necessarily really thought through the causal link of their project or their idea or their startup, and that is actually making measurable change. And so the book opens up with this thing. This first chapter is called The Biggest Mistake. And it's this thing called the value action gap, which hardly anybody has ever heard of. And I'd already been doing this for 15 years before I'd ever heard of it. And once
that's my second question.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, first the question, we'll wrap it all up together.
That's great.
Wrap it all up together, but it's just phenomenal. That's why I put it like the first thing right up the front that you read. And it's fascinating, and it's very easy to test or to study through the academic process, which is that when you educate somebody about change, people often think if people just know about it, if we just educate it, if we get people to care, we think if we get people to know about stuff and get people to care about stuff, then they'll change. But the thing is that they don't, because getting someone to to actually do a behavior, you want them to use less plastic or to donate money or to vote differently or to switch the light off or whatever it is a very different function for that human to take than to just absorb knowledge. So people can really care about the whales, really care about climate change, really care about the trees. Most people do. People can be deeply emotionally concerned about it, but they won't actually take an action. So if you're thinking we need to educate people or we need to get people to care, which is pretty much every single person who wants to change the world thinks that, everyone makes this mistake. That's probably not going to get you into the causality, the actual thing that's going to get people to change.
And that's between what you believe and what you do, right?
Yeah. Even if you really believe that slave labor and poor wages for people are really bad, you still can't help going past the $2 shop and getting the cheap thing and the more expensive fair trade thing. you won't get it because you're just like, oh, do I really want to spend 50 cents extra or $5 extra, or do I really be bothered, like changing my car, switching my car out to an electric car? Getting people to do a behavior is a totally different science. It's a totally different way of going about it.
How do you do it? Then what's the calculus there, or how do you make that then? If I'm an organization, how do I switch my thinking from education to some sort of action?
Well, there's a lot of things you can do, and that's what the book does. It takes you through a 10-step process. So it's not one single answer. Right. It's a process that kind of layers on like layers of the onion to get you a comprehensive strategy. So you make sure that every day you go to work, you actually do change the world. Don't just live in a fantasy of maybe right. changing the world. Well, the first thing I do is put it down to measurement. Ultimately, you have to come up with this thing called a God metric, like the idea that the quantitative measure that you want to change. And a lot of people can get caught up, especially in the startup space, of thinking that new users, members, sales, donations, signatures, just user behavior on an app, that is change. They'll be like, we got 1 million signups. I'm like, well, 1 million signups isn't 1 million trees saved. That's not 1 million pounds of trash taken out of landfill or 1 million tons of carbon dioxide. So we can get very caught up in these kind of business metrics, and then, or we raised funds, but that's not actual quantitative change in terms of like real world matter. That's the word I use, real world matter, that you can measure in kilograms and liters. So you really just want to get your head around that single measurement, and then figure out where you are and where you want to go. For example, Americans make 1,800 pounds of trash a year. And if you want to go zero waste, you ultimately want to get that close to zero. That's your, I call it the spine of measurable change. You want to get from here to there, and that's basically a progress bar. And when you look at most projects, they haven't actually thought of that. And it sounds so simple when you say it. You need to know where you are quantitatively, where you want to go, and then you develop your mission statement. People often think of mission statements as these kind of, we want to these qualitative ideas, like we want to change the world, inspire people, and whatever. Your mission statement should just have a number in it. It should just be this many tons of CO2 to this much. You can make it like an inspiring one later, but ultimately, so one of the practices, the exercises in the book, is to write this quantitative mission statement with a beginning and an end. So that's kind of like your basic skeleton, and you want to build like a feedback loop around that. So once you're making change, you can actually show people like a Fitbit. If or when you weigh yourself, or you check your bank account when you're saving, you can actually see the change, and that being able to see the change in a feedback loop gives you the agency, gives you the motivation. You're like, oh wow, like I got my electricity like 10% down. I'm going to make it go another 10%. So showing the result back to people, and then what you can do is you can add all of the fun stuff. That's the basic kind of game design theory. Then if someone does do well, then you can give them like a digital strawberry or an award or a prize. It's based on that measurable result. We start tapping into the reward center of the brain, instead of just telling people we're all going to die, like the polar bears are dying and the glaciers are melting and things are terrible and we really need politicians to act. If only politicians acted, everything would be different. Using this sort of fear and doom narrative, we're actually just like getting people to engage in something, giving them a bit of positive reward, which can just be something that says good job. That's all people need, like a positive, just, hey, good job, do some more. And we need the numbers. We need to be constantly working on this feedback loop to give people these positive rewards, and then to try and create different behavior actions, not just education, but actual actions. And then there's a number of other behavioral psychology techniques you can use on top of that. But it's basically this feedback loop of measurable change and showing it to people, and then augmenting all of the fun things on top of that.
I mean, that's so you're taking really things that we're using in game design, I guess, and saying, okay, I love my language app that I'm using now, right? Because it rewards me for doing it every day, right? It rewards me for staying on top of it every day and doing the practices and doing the exercises. So I see what you're saying in terms of you're rewarding people for that behavior, but you're reminding them too, right? It's a reminder to change behavior.
Yeah, well, there's this phenomenal effect that happens when people see numbers that they haven't seen before. And I had this hunch a few years ago. I just kind of thought, I have no idea what my environmental footprint is, or my cities, or the company I might work for.
Right.
It's just completely invisible. So I was like, I think people really need to see the numbers. And so I got really kind of obsessed with this and tried to find the academic research around it. And it's fascinating. The most interesting example about this is called the EPA Toxic Release Inventory. And it happened in the late 90s after the Bhopal disaster in India, where a whole lot of people got died a horrible death through fumes, through a sort of a chemical meltdown.
Right.
So the EPA asked all of the corporations in America to just disclose to them how much toxic chemicals they were using. And it was not marketing. There was nothing. It wasn't even public. It was just an accounting measure for the EPA to get a sense of the chemicals. And then a few years later, after doing this, they found that it had actually gone down by 45%. Now, 45% is huge if you're working on environmental change. Can you imagine cutting carbon dioxide emissions by 45%? Or cutting landfill by 45%. It was massive, and it was such a substantial change. All of these academics started studying it to try and figure out what was going on. And they found that through this, they call it the theory of disclosure or transparency, just starting to get people's awareness around the numbers, even if you don't do anything else, that just in itself creates a big change. And the book has more examples of that, just showing people how many cans they're recycling, made the can recycling go up by 68%, showing people how much paper they were recycling. That went up by 77%. So just, even if you don't do any of the other stuff, that in itself is powerful.
Well, that's just, I guess we're visual, maybe. Maybe it's because we're visual people. I wonder why that is. I wonder why that works versus the heart-tugging story.
I just think when you can see something laid out, it's easier to have agency over it. If you see that something is 97 units of whatever, you can be like, oh, that's 97 units. Maybe that's 97 units of something that's bad. Maybe I can get it down. And so I think numbers give you agency to change them. Whereas when they're not there, it's just kind of all a big fuzz. You don't really know what's going on.
What does behavior mapping mean in all of this? What is?
That's my favorite. I'm so excited about behavior mapping. So excited about it. It's changed my life. It's a really simple process, and before you know how to do it, you are completely prone to making zillions of mistakes. So everybody should know this, learn it when they're 15 years old, right? It's just a really simple process of that if you're trying to affect change, you do it in software design, do it in social change design. Mm-hmm. I do it by drawing a stick figure of the person you want to affect. It could be a mother or a teacher or a judge, a politician, a chef, whoever it is. And then you just map out what their day is going to be like and how they were going to come into contact with your project and the change they're going to make. So I wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning, I make breakfast, I take my kid to school. And then if it's something like, for example, the person is going to go shopping, then it's their shopping, and then they'll change what they're purchasing, or they'll change the way they're interacting with their electricity. And it's not just for consumers, it's for anyone. It can be very senior people who are in charge of organizations, or kind of like a single consumer. And you just map it out. And then you map out what is the action you want them to take. So you're completely focused on the action. And then the measurable result you'll get from that action. So the action, can be, we want people to purchase an electric car. That's the single action that you want to have happen.
Right.
So when you've got a behavior map, that becomes the skeleton of your social change campaign, because you're like, okay, we want to get everybody to do this action. So instead of you thinking like, oh, let's do a documentary, let's write a book, maybe we should do a protest or do a campaign, and you're kind of coming up with this causality issue. We don't know if that's actually going to change. When you do a behavior map, you're like, okay, the only thing that matters is driving this behavior. That is all, everything goes into that. So once you've got a behavior map, you can just get very, very sharp, very ruthless about making sure your project makes people do that thing. And if it's not making people do that thing, you don't do it. It's failing, basically.
That makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense.
I do it with stick figures. I just really like the stick figure. And then I'm like, here's Jane. And she goes, dit.
Nice. You talk about leveraging the power of social comparison. What do you mean by that?
social comparison is fascinating. It's part of an overall theory of tapping into the core human psychology, which is social. And this comes back again to the value action gap. When we're trying to educate people, trying to understand something that's intellectual and abstract, like glaciers or atmospheric carbon dioxide, that's not tapping into the social core of the human. The social core is how we compare ourselves to others in our community, which we can't, which has a bit of a negative side. You always feel like you're not keeping up with the Joneses, but that's still core to human psyche. We can't get away from how we compare ourselves to the people around us. And then also how we imitate others. If you see everybody with a certain type of haircut or listening to music, you can't help but copy what they're doing. It's as simple as if everybody's leaving trash on the ground, you'll probably just throw trash on the ground as well. Because our social relationships are core to the way we think. So you can just learn everything about an issue, but that will not be nearly as powerful as if I be like, Rhett, you make, like 15 pounds of trash this week, but your neighbors only made 10. How come you're making 5 more than everybody else? That basic comparison is it's just core to just basic cognitive decision making. If you've got, 3 different apples and one looks better than the other or have different nutritional qualities or different prices, where the brain is designed to get through life being able to just be like, well, which car do you want? This car, or this car, or that? You want to buy that shirt, or that shirt? Just being able to line things up and compare is a very intuitive, natural way of thinking. And so when you start just adding how people quantitatively compare to each other, you're just tapping in right into the core of the way humans operate.
How can organizations use that?
Just whatever action you identify that you want people to do. If you can, some things are a little bit harder to measure, more in like the social change, but in environmental change, you might have something, for example, I'm working on at the moment, which is the amount of green cover per city, amount of trees, parks, grass, etc. So the more green, the better, right? So we can get a satellite image, and there's through some basic kind of simple image processing software, we can figure out what the percentage is of plant life covering the city.
Okay.
And then that can just be one city by itself, right? Okay, your city is like 14% green cover. But now what we can do is we can do that for many cities, and now we can compare many cities to each other. So we can actually put them all like in a leaderboard of progress bars, and I've got one of these designs I'm working on. Looking at the green cover per city, right? And so it's actually for a city, not even for an individual. And you could even do that for individual properties. Like, what is the percentage of green cover of your property? Is your property just like all concrete, or is it all kind of like green, trees and grass and plants? Right. And have you got that kind of like covering the roof, because the roofs get hot in summer? And then you can compare people against people, and then you use that when people see, oh, how am I doing, or how's my city? You use that to drive the action. So you're like, okay, I got your attention. Right. Now do the thing. Here's the call to action. So you kind of use it as leverage for the call to action.
We're in last place. We want to get up to first place. And right, I got it.
Yeah, so you can just compare one person to another or to the average, or you can do a leaderboard. One of my concepts I'm working on is a leaderboard of the energy use of apartments that get in the foyer of an apartment. If you have 50 apartment buildings, you put them in a digital leaderboard of who's the most energy efficient to who's the least. And then, you're not telling anybody what to do. You're not micromanaging anyone. To say you're welcome to use lots of energy, but you're just going to be on the leaderboard. And if you want to take that place, that's up to you.
I like that. A little pressure, a little social pressure there. What's your subtitle in the book is How to Make Changing the World the Greatest Game We've Ever Played. What does that mean?
Well, it's a nicer one than this really long, rambling, wordy one that I had before, which was how to use game design techniques, behavioral psychology, data, and measurement to change the world. So
that's long.
That was a mouthful. It's an ultimate vision that I started to cultivate maybe 5 or 7 years ago, when I started to realize that there was this whole big chapter unfolding for the planet of this cybernetic Earth, which was covering the Earth in sensors, measuring water, trash, forest cover. We've got satellites and sensors measuring everything, air pollution. There are all these new web libraries that you can develop software quite easily. There's more Wi-Fi and networks than there ever have been before, and the sensors are getting cheaper. It's completely unfolded really in the last few years. And so we'll be able to measure the entire Earth, kind of like a patient in a hospital. Like, we'll be able to know what's going on and then feed that information in real time. And we've never, ever been able to do that before. It's been done fairly simplistically up until now. It's all kind of starting to emerge. So once we have all these numbers, all this data coming from it, we can really get some power in making, adding these game design techniques or this gamification of saving the planet. Instead of, if you've got a video game and it's fun, the whole idea is a video game is it's fun, you get rewarded, it's working with the reward center of the brain, you're working with other people, you're kind of competing and collaborating at the same time. There's all this like funness built into what the game experience is. Right. All of this new data that's coming from the planet means that we can use all that idea of like fun, mastery, positive rewards, competition and collaboration together at the same time. And saving the world becomes fun. It becomes like a game. And the numbers give us this agency. So it's no longer the doom and gloom fight. It's now this fun, exciting quest to get to the future amazing world, like Star Wars, like Luke Skywalker on the quest to kind of save the universe. We're on our quest to change the world and to make it sort of a positive, inspirational, imaginative, creative journey. And the numbers give us this ability. All this measurement is what is the sort of the circulatory system that comes behind that.
So what do you think your biggest takeaways of the book are, and how do you think, or what do you think the biggest impact for an organization is going to be?
When they read the book and implement the techniques?
Right. Yeah.
I think it's getting really, there's probably two things that I think you could boil it down to. One is getting just really real with causality. It's been a real problem for the movement, and I would like to bring this concept of causality just front and center to everybody's day. That, every day you get to work, you use up whatever budget or process in getting money, that you are absolutely maximizing the causal link to creative change. If you're there to plant trees are being planted,
Right.
And all of the techniques in the book will help maximize that. And if you've been living in a bit of a bubble of thinking you're making impact and not, which some people do, you'll be able to kind of restructure your project. You may not change it completely, but you'll be able to tweak it and maybe move some things around and change it. So instead of just making a documentary, which everybody says, wow, that was really moving, and nothing ever changes, you'll be able to do something in film or documentary that maybe has a few other moving pieces, like some pledges or a local campaign or some calls to action or some measurement data around it. And then you'll be able to come away after a year saying, yeah, we actually did really create change. You know that you did it. So there's causality. And the second one is vision and optimism, vision, and creativity. There tends to be a lot of doom and negativity thinking going around in the social and environmental space, and I could not be more passionate about trying to present the image of being able to imagine the future world as a beautiful, wonderful place, and making this art of changing the world into, what do I call it, the greatest game on earth, the greatest game we've ever played, or the greatest creative adventure of our time. I think I call it that. And I truly believe that it is the greatest creative adventure of our time, and we're able to imagine the future world instead of being constantly reactive to, oh, there's this terrible thing happening, homelessness and plastic trash. It's like, it's terrible. That we're actually like, I can imagine a world where homelessness is just extinct as a concept. We just have moved so far beyond it, it doesn't exist anymore. And that's the world I want to make. And I imagine a world where plastic trash, it just doesn't exist. Everything is clean. Cities are clean and beautiful, imaginative, safe places.
There's no plastic in the ocean. There's no...
Yeah, trash is just gone. It is like something in history. It just... Yeah. We live in a new world where these things don't exist, and that we start casting our imagination and our creativity into making this world. And that's something I love to talk about and to share and to help get all my buddies who are my fellow world changers to get into this really positive, imaginative headspace. Because there's nothing better. It's a wonderful way to think, and it's important and useful. And the doom space is just not really, it's not the best way to go about changing the world.
Depressing.
Yeah, and not only that, it actually shrinks your cognitive capacity by 30%.
Wow. Okay.
Real. So it's not healthy for you, and it makes you age faster, and it makes you depressed, and you really want to get out of the doom space and into the imagination space.
Well, and also, what an awful environment and kind of culture to work in, right? I mean, that's no fun. What's the key? This is sort of off topic a little bit, but what's the key to sort of unlocking innovation in a social organization, you think?
Oh, I should have a good answer for this off the top of my head. Nobody's asked me that specifically.
I mean, you work in innovation and you work in this space, and I, it just sort of popped into my head, like, I'm on a lot of boards, and I've been an executive director in a couple of nonprofits before I was in business, and to me, it's a really nonprofit. The nonprofit world is tough, right? It's a grind. You're overworked. Usually, people in the organization are stretched because you're stretched with budget, and sometimes, you feel like you've got this social mission, but you're struggling to get there, and it's and I'm just wondering, any thoughts on, if you're out there now and you're listening, you're an executive director of a nonprofit, and you want to be more innovative, you want to have a better culture, what do you think?
Well, I usually work for myself, so I'm just practicing all this stuff just on myself rather than practicing it on groups. So I don't have I can't say from experience that I've actually done it, that I've transformed one organization into
Sure.
all of these innovators. But there's one exercise I have in the book that I love to do, and sometimes I do workshops and teach it, which is it's a mind mapping exercise where you write down the quantitative goal of where you want to go. Mm-hmm. It could be in parts per million of a chemical, or the amount of tree cover that you want to achieve. It's getting you into this destination, this goal headspace. And then what you do is you mind map 100 ideas of how to get there. So instead of being stuck in kind of the structure of the organization, or this is kind of what we do, and this is how we do it, and this is how we've always done it, you totally get out of that headspace, and then you start thinking about getting your imagination working about how to come up with that idea. That's what I do when I want to try and think of something. It's like, well, if I want to get a city to 40% tree cover, you write down in the middle, 40% tree cover, and then you start. Okay, well, what would I do? I would get schools. I would get communities. Maybe I would get people to share a tree with their next door neighbor. And then you just start going and going and going and going. And the idea of making it 100 ideas is there's this idea that ideas are kind of like this sacred thing, but you've really got to see ideas like acorns falling from the tree, that you just can have lots of them, and anybody can have lots of them. When you tell someone, you kind of give them permission to have 100 ideas. You normally wouldn't think you would. But when you really push yourself, you can come up with 100 ideas. Sometimes I do this and I'm up to 60 ideas and I'm like, okay, I can't.
And then you feel stuck.
And then I just push on, and then I get a second wave and I'm like, no, we could do this and that and that. And you'll find somewhere in there's some maybe 3 things that are really cool that you can do now. And getting people into that kind of open brainstorming headspace. And also there's this really interesting thing that goes on with the brain. There's this part of the brain called the default mode network, which some people who study neuroscience, psychology might know about. And that's the bit of your brain that when you're not engaged in a kind of a busy executive cognitive task, you're just kind of staring at the window or, daydreaming, it kind of goes into operation. It's kind of like you're thinking behind your thinking. And that's the part of the brain that helps come up with ideas and creative thought and imagination. So stepping out of being really busy all the time. So if you've got all your organization and everyone, you're trying to hammer productivity and busyness, right? Mm-hmm. Busy, everybody, get things done. And that's your key metric for how you're running your organization. You're not going to be giving your group the space to get into their default mode network way of thinking, which is you need to say to everybody, there's nothing to do today. Nothing's going to catch fire.
Right.
Nothing's going to go wrong. I just want you to creatively brainstorm And it's hard for people that are always used to being go, 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 to just actually step back. It's almost, you need to come to almost a spiritual sort of yogic place to let the stress of life, your relationship and your house and your bills, and kind of like get away from all of that, and then just be like, we're just going to brainstorm. But there's a sort of a deeper philosophy of realizing that, well, one that I take on is that creative and imaginative thought is kind of like the core of life, or the meaning of life, the core of everything important. And when you go through a worldview where you believe that creative thought and innovation are the kind of like blood of the universe. That sounded really gross. I don't think I'll ever say the blood of the universe again. Yeah. I meant to say just like the life force. But that's kind of like that channeling that energy is where everything good comes from. I mean, that's what I believe, and that's been the evidence that's happened in my own life. When I get into that space, good things happen to me. And when I just try and be busy and productive, not many good things, everything becomes more just very average. And if you believe that, you're able to instill that structurally in the organization. You'll be able to make sure that, once a month you have these days. But if you only believe that in productivity and structure, you're never going to be able to implement that. So I would say it has to come core to the executive's value system.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. And that's great advice, by the way. I think that's a great exercise. I mean, I think you could really impact your culture. I mean, you think about how people feel when they've contributed to something like that, right? And it's nobody's critical of what you said or what.
That's the example of the ideas coming off the circle.
Yeah, I love it. That's fantastic. And sorry to surprise you with that question, but I thought you might have something really good and tangible that people could use, and there you go. I'm glad you did. How do you make change fun in an organization?
You mean changing the world or changing the organization itself?
Or how do you make your mission? I guess I want to bring it down to an organization that's trying to change. I mean, changing the world should be fun, but I mean, people are going to apply it to themselves and to their cause and to what they're doing. Does that question make sense? I guess.
Well, yeah. I mean, everybody's trying to change, themselves, their organizations, and the world. So it kind of applies to all the things, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just think this exercise of imagining the future world when it's fixed. So you can do that for your own personal life. I actually started getting into this stuff through the self-help movement when they said, imagine your perfect body and your perfect house and your perfect relationship. And I started doing all these little you create the mood board. You create the mood board of like you cut a house out of a magazine. And I did that, maybe it was 7 or 8 years ago. And then I thought, well, I think this is just, okay, I've done it for my own life. I've got a Google image of my perfect house and a picture of like Miranda Kerr or someone in a bikini. And I'm like, yeah, okay. Well, what about the world? What if I was to walk down a city and I was to imagine this version of the city I lived in, or how the electricity grid would work? Or what would forest management, world forest, or constant problem, they're being constantly cut down. How would forestry work if I was going to do the mood board for the perfect world? And I just felt such an enormous psychological shift when I started doing this. It was almost like I went into this transcendental state of imagining what this kind of utopian, amazing, best possible world. And I just felt like something changed in me, and I never have gone back. It was kind of like a line in the sand of my life when I realized that I could think like this all the time. Mm-hmm. And so I think when you are looking at change, I mean, we think about it for our own personal lives, but for your organization or the niche the entrepreneurship niche that you work in, is to start doing that as an exercise. You can draw it. You can, like, if you work in architecture or engineering or anything to do with smart cities or that physical space, draw a picture of what you think the most incredible, amazing, beautiful world will be. Try yourself into a box, because being like, if I would walk down the street, I would see, you know, cherry blossoms and vegetables hanging off the buildings, and there would be like kids playing, and all the cars would be electric, and there'd be no air pollution. Everything would smell nice. There'd be art, you know, everybody would be reasonably, you know, happy. You wouldn't get this like severe pockets of dysfunction. Everything would be nice, solar powered, plants, animals, wildlife corridors, deer walking downtown, you know, and you just get into this space that's just so wonderful and positive, and that I think gives you, well, it gives me, being able to do this, just this tremendous positive energy. Like it's fun, it's exciting. There's like another imaginary world kind of in my head,
right,
that I'm sort of interacting between this world and this other world. And I look at a building and I'm like, that building's dirty. That building should really have a green wall on it. I'm going to start innovating about how to make more buildings have more green walls. And that's a very fun, happy, positive space to be in. It's cultivating ideas. You know,
right.
The brain's always ticking over with ideas. So it's about change. So I think once you've got that mental landscape, as a practice, you actually have to sit down and imagine it. You do the mind mapping exercise, you do the drawing, you draw the picture of what you want, then you're able to take action to get there. That's your destination. So you can figure out how to get there, and that's what change. You have to change to get to that place. But if you haven't imagined the place, how are you going to be motivated to arrive there?
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Sure. I think so.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, I think we all struggle with how to. I mean, change is hard, but I like that idea of creating this vision, and I think that helps people understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, right? And I think that's great.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I said, well, the book has 270 pages of exercises of how to create change. So that example of the mind mapping around a quantitative number and the visualization is they're just two exercises amongst many. So it's too much we can't take us 3 hours to go through all of them. But the book is, I mean, every single case study, every single exercise is one of those things about how to create change. So I just plucked a couple out of what I know.
I wanted to talk to you about narrative design, and I wanted to talk to you about social diffusion. However, I got a question that I want to get to from LinkedIn. This is from Ruben Persek. I probably mispronounced that. And he asked, let me make sure I've got the whole message. He asked, do you consider positive thinking and imagination essential for a positive behavior change?
Positive thinking.
Consider positive thinking and imagination essential to positive behavior change.
No, I don't think they're essential. I think you can get people to make a positive behavior change very simply. It's not that hard. There's one technique in the book called pledges, where you ask somebody to write down something they're going to commit to. So they find this with smoking, for example. If you get somebody to watch a documentary about how the horrible deaths people go through lung cancer, that is not nearly as motivating as if you ask somebody to write down on a piece of paper, I commit to quitting smoking or only smoking maybe 2 cigarettes a day for a week. Because when we write down, it's coming back to that social core. I'm making a promise to you. And there are few things that are psychologically stronger than making a promise to another person, our sense of trust between each other. So you don't need any imagination or positive thinking to do a pledge. That's really, really low-hanging fruit. You can send somebody a report card that shows how they compare to their neighbors with their action. That's a way to do it. So I think in terms of creating positive change, and then again, you mentioned the idea of social norms and social imitation. You can show an image of, this is how you recycle, just show a picture of somebody doing it, someone who's possibly desirable, someone you might like to be like, they look cool. And then people can copy that, or you show people copying things. So creating action is, you can do it, it can be a low-hanging fruit if you know how to do it. But the imagination and the positive future vision stuff is much more of a bigger creative process. If you're trying to dream up your next startup, or you're trying to come up with a great keynote speech to kind of inspire people. or just as an overall creative practice, just to keep your spirits lifted. It's a kind of like a different dimension of thought to get into.
Yeah. Hey, so where can people get the book?
If you go to my website, katiepatrick.com, spelled Katie. The Indiegogo is the best place to get it from, because I can also send you like the PDF and the audio book when that comes out. But you could also get it on Amazon. I think it's cheaper on the Indiegogo campaign, and you get through that through my website. And I just send it off straight away. So, well,
I have to say congratulations on the Indiegogo thing. I launched my first book on Kickstarter, 7 or 8 years ago, and so I understand how you did that, and that yours was much better than ours. But
thank you. Yeah, it's a really big job. It's a bigger job than they look at first. I think when you see other people do it, you're like, oh, that person just did a $50,000 Kickstarter. I'm just going to throw a video up and it'll just happen. It really is. It's kind of like a really big process to go through.
Yeah, it is. It certainly is. And then congratulations on that. And thank you so much for being on the show today. And I've got to have you back, because I've got I've got a whole nother page of questions that I wanted to ask you. And so maybe we'll do that in the future. But good luck with the book. I know you're going to be out talking about it a lot, and I hope you have this big success on it. I think it's certainly an important read for managers and directors and boards of these organizations that are trying to do social change, because I think that we didn't even talk about the 10-step process, which is, again, something else I wanted to ask you about. But
it takes too long. It takes 3 hours. When I do it, like I have a slideshow that I do as a workshop, it takes 3 hours. But I would encourage people to sign up to my website, though, because I have a whole bunch of free downloads. And there's a link to articles on my Medium page as well, where I've got different sections of it that you can download different bits and pieces. And on my Twitter, I sometimes do an Instagram. I do little mini lessons from the book. So there's a fair bit there you can just get for the 3 downloads, and on my podcast. And then if you want to get serious, you can get the whole big book and go through it all.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And if you want the Power Lunch Live to come to your conference or your event, we're happy to do it. We're taking our show on the road on a pretty regular basis. We're going to be in Brazil next week. And I think we're going to be in Oslo coming up soon. So in Norway. So if you want us to come to a conference or event, we're happy to do that, to broadcast live. And go to the website. We've got a great lineup coming up in the next couple of weeks. You can go to powerlunch.live, the website, to check out our